Thank you very much. We all worked through the fallout of the last financial crisis, and I think the thing that stays with me is the heads I win, tails you lose approach of bankers. And so on a yes or no answer, are each of you content that it's reported that SVB and Credit Suisse will continue to pay bonuses to their staff? Are you content? Governor?
Can I answer that with more than one word?
No, I'd like a yes or no, and then you can have more than one word, but I'd like to know if you're content with that.
I just can't answer the question sensible in one word because I need to talk about which bit of the bank we're talking about.
Okay,
so SVB UK is the bit that's directly within our bailiwick.
Okay, but let me ask it in another way. In what other sector in the UK, if your boss fails, if your business fails, do you then get a bonus?
Well, obviously that's not a normal arrangement. What I would just say about SVB UK is that what happened here was an issue at the parent crystallised.
Any other business where
sure.
It has a UK end of an international business, where else would you get paid a significant bonus? The point I'm getting at, isn't this creating moral hazard on a grand scale, which is that no matter where I work, if I'm in financial services, there is no downside for me personally?
But that's why we have in place a regime by which bonuses have to be deferred and then they can be taken back.
But will they be?
Well, that's to be judged. I don't think any of us yet know the facts around that, so we're not going to comment on that. But what we do have in this country, and it's actually pretty unique to this country actually, is a regime where bonuses are deferred over a period of time, a period of years, and have to be surrendered if facts come to light, either in the performance of the individual or the performance of the firm subsequently, which mean that that's the appropriate thing to do. We can't comment on Credit Suisse because that's a Swiss issue.
Okay, but the facts have already come to light. SVB went bust, Credit Suisse went bust. They've both been bought rather than resolved. They would have had to have been resolved otherwise. And yet, their subsidiaries in the UK, their branches in the UK, will still get their bonuses. Is that reasonable?
Well, here, as I say, I would make a distinction here between what happened in the UK and for the UK bank of SVB and what happened at the group level. So the UK entity was well capitalised, it was liquid. The issue that knocked it out was that an issue crystallised at group, which immediately spread into the UK and led to a run. So I don't think that, obviously there have been quite severe consequences for any executives that held any of their wealth in stock in those banks. But I do think that you need to look to what happens in the US, and I'm quite sure there will be some quite significant consequences there. The Swiss have made some statements, but as Andrew said, it's not yet quite clear exactly how they're going to handle Credit Suisse. But I know it's not the most popular thing in the world to say, but I would draw that distinction between what happened in the UK. I think if any taxpayer funds had been involved in the UK, in either of these entities, we'd be in a very, very different situation.
I completely understand that, but the fact is that SVB did not have to go bust. It went bust because of the high risk-taking activities of bankers in SVB, who in the UK, who are party to that, regardless of whether they're in a usefully ring-fenced structure. And as you said yourself, Sam, and I think the governor said it was previously a branch. It was only forced to become a UK ring-fenced bank. So suddenly, by virtue of action taken by you, the UK bank is now ring-fenced, and so you're able to say, well, I would draw a distinction between the UK bank and the US parent. Is that fair? Is that fair? Okay, on this occasion, not to the taxpayer, but to those who are in effect paying for the financial system. Is it right that bankers still get bonuses even after what we saw following the financial crisis?
That's why, that's in good part why we have this regime whereby those bonuses then have to be deferred. And
but you've just said yourself, Governor, that you don't know what will be the situation in SVB or CSFB.
Well, we haven't had that discussion yet.
But you will?
Well, I'm sure it will be part of the supervision of the firm, like HSBC now.
Okay, and in terms of the senior managers and certification regime, do you think that there will be anyone who is held personally liable for the risks that have been taken either in SVB or CSFB?
Look, I don't want to get ahead of where we are on either of those cases. Credit Suisse has had a number of issues through time which accumulated in this event, and there's obviously been enforcement action taken against Credit Suisse in a number of ways and in different jurisdictions. I think Silicon Valley Bank UK, I really don't want to comment on it in detail, but I would come back to the observation I made, which is about the distinction, as I see it, and you may or may not buy it, but between what happened in the UK and the way the UK entity was run and what happened in terms of how that was sorted out in the UK and what happened in the US. I think there is a distinction there.
You do seem to be saying all the way through this evidence session, Sam, that our regulation is better than anyone else's. And I'm not putting words in your mouth, that's how I'm hearing it. And you can disagree, but nevertheless, is it not therefore the case that you as PRA are going to have to look very carefully at all of the activities going on where headquarters are somewhere else, in order to ensure that we don't just see this as wholesale, where we end up owning a problem that perhaps we can deal with where it's a UK ring-fenced entity, but where, in the case of SVB, if it hadn't become UK ring-fenced, it would have been a massive problem for us, not of our doing, through regulation somewhere else that we disagree with.
So,
Andrew, I was going to say, can I just go back to what I said earlier? It had to become a subsidiary because we have a policy that said, you've hit a trigger, you have to become a subsidiary. So there is a...
But if it was £1 million under that trigger, it wouldn't have hit that trigger. So that is, that is fate. That is just how it happened.
It's more than fate, if you like. I mean, the bank was growing, and therefore it had to change.
So are you saying then that had it been slightly smaller, and therefore it hadn't hit that trigger, that the issue for the UK would have been easy?
Well, I mean, I think it's the case that actually our supervisors said to it back in 2020, you are on a trajectory which means you will have to subsidiarise. And so they did.
So if this had happened in 2019, what then?
It was a much smaller institution at that point. We'd still had to deal with it, but it was a much smaller.
So you're saying that actually even in small banks, the smaller end of small banks will present fewer systemic, regulatory issues for the UK.
Refer back to something Sam said early on in this hearing. And this has been true for the PRA ever since we started it 10 years ago. We do not operate a no-failure regime because that would have all sorts of consequences if we did that.
Maybe I can just add two brief comments. One, I do not contend that our regulation is better than everyone else's. I just think that would be a very foolish thing to do, and in particular I have great respect for the US and the way they run their system. As it happens in this case, there are some differences, which is what I was alluding to. But on your broader point, there is of course something in this. So we are a very large host of branches. So on the latest numbers I have, we've got £6.3 trillion in branches in this country. It's more than 150 branches. That, I think, is a necessary condition if we want to run a very large financial centre. But we've made a judgment, as Andrew says, around where to draw the line in terms of what makes you have to become a subsidiary, and we've enforced that. There is, I think, a legitimate question, which may be what you're sort of angling at, and which I think we do need to reflect on, is, in light of how the system is evolving, is that threshold in exactly the right place?
Exactly.
Might it be in another place?
Yeah.
I think that is an open question, but I would want to impress upon you that we make a risk choice here, that we host a lot of branches, and as set out very clearly in Andrew's letter, when you've got a branch, you are massively more dependent on the home, and there is of course some risk in that arrangement.
Okay, well thank you very much. I would certainly be interested to see the outcome of both the senior managers and certification regime in terms of executives of SVB and Credit Suisse in the UK, but also to see whether in fact they do implement their deferrals of bonuses and so on. And frankly, why would bonuses be paid in any case? And I still would assert that actually it's their good fortune that they were in a UK ring-fence bank, because if they hadn't been, they presumably would not be getting bonuses now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.